the bottom line is it is terrible to have your UTV be on fire.
This is the Wildfire Lessons Podcast. Our goal is to promote learning by revealing the complexity and risk in the wildland fire environment. We share the lessons. The learning that follows is up to you. Hi, I'm Kelly Woods, Director of the Wildland Fire Lessons Learned Center. On today's episode, Lessons Learned Center analyst Travis Dotson and I talk about the latest issue of one of our newest learning tools, Data Points. The intent of Data Points is to highlight a recurring lesson that we've seen in multiple events. The featured recurring lesson from our latest Data Points is related to UTV fires. Travis and I will discuss the lesson and some of the specific instances of UTV fires. Be sure to visit our website, lessons.wildfire.gov, to download the document. We also recommend checking out your agency policy related to carrying a fire extinguisher on your UTV. It probably won't surprise you to learn that policies vary across agencies. I hope our conversation gets you thinking about your procedures related to UTV use and maintenance. All right. Hey, Travis, should we talk about our latest data points?
Yeah. I actually am excited to do the podcast about data points in general, right? That as a concept, and then this one in particular. This is one that's been boiling for a while, and it's good to keep getting the lessons from the past of the past events, but also some of the newer things that have that we've discovered as time goes on.
Yeah.
Stuff, so.
Yeah, and I think your point is right on. The whole concept of data points is a pretty cool. Our publication called Data Points, where we kind of look at clusters of occurrence of a particular type of thing, or sometimes it might be just similar events that have some kind of a lesson or a call to action that's fairly simple and concise, and people can take it and run with it and implement it immediately. Our first data points came out looking at the use of carrying soft stretchers to help with medevacs. We had a number of events where the lessons from the folks involved pointed to the fact that having a soft stretcher or a carry-all like that helped them transport an injured person off the line. That's a great data point.
Yeah, it's a recurring lesson, right? And I think this data points provides a venue for us to do the thing that we are in a unique position to do. Because there's always been this discussion around, okay, so there's an incident and somebody goes and does an FLA or a facilitated learning analysis, or somebody from on scene submits a rapid lesson sharing, or agency does a serious accident investigation, whatever. Somehow a report comes to the Lessons Learned Center, right? And then we publish it. And then there's always the question of like, okay, well, what then? How does the lesson get implemented or learned or whatever? And there's all kinds of chatter about that. But for a long time, it was like just focusing on that single event. You know what I mean? The lessons are from that event. But what we're doing now is one of the benefits of collecting all of these things is being able to zoom out and look a little bit more like at the collective data set, right? And just like you're talking about with the soft stretcher, we saw it in a report and didn't really think that much of it. Like, oh, cool, those folks are carrying what seems to be like a pretty useful soft stretcher. They noted it in the lessons, oh, that's neat. But then somebody else, because we read all the reports, we see it again and say, hey, somebody else said that, and then you see it a third time, and now it's like it's hard to ignore.
Yeah, that's where it gets into that recurring lesson.
As like, and then, but where's the venue? Of course, we see it because we read them all, and we are the Lessons Learned Center, and that's our job, right? So of course we're going to see that, but not everybody gets to see that now, or they're not reading every single report with zoomed in a focus as we are, right? People aren't doing that analysis. And then now, so because we have this collection and we have regular eyeballs on these things, we notice this stuff and we can say, hey, this might be something we want to point out in a more intentional fashion. And I think data points as a tool, as a product, helps us get that word out. And
Yeah,
so,
it seems like too. It's just as you say, one of the things we hear from people sometimes is I can't read everything.
Yeah.
And so this is that summary, and it's really intended for any level of the organization, right? This is like whether you're on a crew, you're a module leader, you're a fire management officer, or you're sitting in the national office and controlling the purse strings that get out there to, make some kind of an investment in, increasing safety or efficiency or whatever. This is a thing that you should read on any level, because it is that recurring lesson. And we try and keep them to a pretty simple, just call to action. Buy soft stretchers, carry soft stretchers, make sure your folks have them, because, I was just reading a new report we got today, and they had soft stretchers, and I thought, oh, cool. There's that.
Man.
So yeah, it seems like everybody who's used one has been really glad that they've had it.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is the thing I used to say sometimes in defending reporting, right? Is that, hey, sometimes the lesson is from the event, and sometimes the lesson is in the collective. You don't see it until it's been repeated multiple times, right? And so that's where the argument for reporting things, not for the particular lesson that comes from that event, but for it being a tick mark. And we don't know what the tick mark's going to be, you know what I mean? So like the original person that chose to include the fact that the soft stretcher was really handy, they might have just said, that doesn't really matter. You know what I mean? Like that's not really a lesson, because they could never predict how useful that was when 3 different reports mentioned it, right? So sometimes the lesson is in the collective view, and you're not going to know that until later. And I mean, we don't want to go to extremes where it's like, oh, you got to report every single little possible thing because it could become,
a collective.
yeah, like we don't know that. But in general, when you're deciding whether or not you should submit something about an incident, right? Like your UTV caught on fire.
Yeah.
Who knows what the thing we will discover is when we have several of those. And I think the stuff we're going to talk about today with UTV fires is another good case.
It really is. And as you say, it's like when we publish a data points, everyone should read it.
Because, yeah, totally.
And
like you said, there's all those different things. And to me, it's always the sphere of influence, because we can always say, I'd love to have a soft stretcher for my crew, but my boss is notoriously against spending money, so I'm not even going to take it to him or whatever. You know what I mean? Like there's that person that says, oh, I don't have the power to do it myself. But if all those different levels are reading it, somebody in there with the sphere of influence might say, it might be not the FMO, but the regional person that says, hey, this looks like it could be really useful for our folks. And it's only, 1 page. And then all of a sudden that FMO is getting it from the region, right? They're saying, hey, we actually have some extra money this year based on the data that has come out from the Lessons Learned Center. Here's a thing to consider purchasing.
I think the National Park Service, the national office, actually bought soft stretchers after the data points came out. So yeah, it's a great thing. So definitely people should read it.
Yeah. Or the scenario I imagine, right? Which is like somebody's been saying, we should get soft stretchers. And their boss is like not paying attention to them or saying, no, that's, and then something from the Lessons Learned Center, Lessons Learned Center comes out saying, everybody should have these. And then they can take it and leave it on their desk like, see, told you.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah, we'll enable you to be annoying.
There you
Be
go.
the squeaky wheel to get the tool. Another thing with the data points that is, it's a good way for us to communicate things to the masses. We get asked a lot about trends, right? And
Yeah.
and that's like, I mean, people on all levels will ask, what's the latest trends? And we kind of struggle with that term trends, because a trend needs to develop over a given period of time. And so if we have, 5 UTVs catch on fire this year, is that a trend? Or is it just this, a sort of anomaly of occurrence, or is it because people are reporting more, or what is it? And in the end, does it really matter if it's a trend or if it's a cluster of occurrence? It's just, hey, here's some lessons that are pretty actionable and people can do right now. So that idea of trend is kind of funny. It's like, there's a lot of reasons that we suddenly start hearing about soft stretchers, or there's this group of UTV fires, or whatever it is. And we don't have to wait for a trend to take action if that's pretty easy, relatively inexpensive, and, can save a lot of money and make us better at what we do.
Yeah. If people ask me, what are the latest trends? I usually say like, oh, bandanas are out, and then cutting your pants really high. Those are the things that seem like they're.
I thought you would have said high vis shirts are really trendy.
Yeah, that's the latest trend, right?
That's your thing, right?
Blindingly bright, flame resistant clothing. Yeah, that's definitely that's what the cool kids are wearing anyway.
That's what I hear.
Yeah, that whole trend, there's actually in the world of statistics, there's like a definition to it, and it's pretty involved, and to just call something a trend because you've seen 2 different instances of it is not entirely accurate, and all the stuff that you were saying about like, does it matter, and then sometimes it is actually a trend, but I don't know that it's always. It takes so long for us to be able to say that, right?
Yeah.
Like you said, it takes over a long period of time. But I understand the intent. I understand what people are asking about.
Yeah, they're kind of asking, what should we be addressing? And that's what data points.
See?
Yeah, and that's what data points is really meant to do, is to put a light on something that we're seeing because we have the benefit of reading all the reports.
Yeah, it's a collective view. I always describe it as being zoomed out to a point where we can, and I think that's important. It's like being the lookout for the Wildland Fire Service. That's the way that we were describing our role for a while, which is like, hey, there's certain things that we can see that not other folks can see, simply because of what we do. And this is one of those instances where it's like. And now we can show exactly, like on this one, it's like, hey, in the past 10 years, we've had this many events that are similar, and then some of the lessons that go along with it.
I think it's worth mentioning too that folks can go to our website, lessons.wildfire.gov, and across the top there, if you go down the products menu, you would see data points as one of the options to select. And right now we just have 2 issues posted right now, but it's something that we're really excited about doing more of in the future when we find these, collections of things that we can share. So
yeah, and it's good that there's only a few of them, right? Because that was part of the thinking here is there is so much, our reporting culture has gotten so robust. It's kind of this crazy balance, right? And we can't expect people to read all the reports. If only, 12 reports were coming out a year, we could expect people, hey, read them all. But when there's 115, that's not fair to expect that.
Sometimes it's hard to get them all read when it's our full-time job.
Totally, right?
Yeah.
But all of that reporting also enables something like data points, right? And so it is another way of summarizing things, and managers or whoever it is that they sometimes are requesting a way to get the most important or the things that do have a call to action. You know what I mean? And so if a data points product does come out, yes, you want to take a
You
look
want
at
to
that
check it
because
out.
it is a culmination of a whole bunch of stuff that you might not have been able to track on your own. And so it's a good thing that there's only a few of them there.
Yeah, for sure. And when folks open the document, we've got links into the source documents if people want to read further, which I think is always pretty handy as well. So
Absolutely.
should we dive in and talk about this latest one, what we're featuring
Yeah,
here, what the lesson is?
for sure. So I guess the big picture is UTVs catch on fire. Now, UTVs are relatively recent. You know what I mean? And I say relatively. There's just more UTVs out there in operations over the past 10 years in general. So it makes sense that we would be starting to learn things about using UTVs on the fire ground. That's one thing to take into account, is that there's more UTVs and they're super useful, and it makes sense that we're learning about how to operate with them in this specific environment.
Yeah, the recurring lesson here is equip all UTVs with an accessible and serviceable fire extinguisher. So, what do we mean here? What does the data show us about accessible and serviceable?
Number one, UTVs catch on fire for a variety of reasons, right? And so making sure that the UTV has a fire extinguisher. Of course, that comes from instances where there was not a fire extinguisher available and the UTV was on fire, right? So right there, you have several different instances of just, okay, here's the fact: UTVs catch on fire. So yeah, that'd be great to have a fire extinguisher. And then that's reinforced when somebody's looking for it and it's not there. And then the accessible part of it is another pretty specific thing. Just because you put a fire extinguisher with your UTV doesn't mean that the problem is solved on a couple different fronts, because we've had instances where the UTV did indeed have a fire extinguisher, but they couldn't get to it, or they didn't know it was there because of where it was.
Yeah. There was the one, was it in Texas in 2022, where it was under the seat, stored under the seat, and the seat was on fire. So when they realize there's a fire on board, they can't get to the fire extinguisher. So it complicated suppression actions.
Absolutely. Yeah, there was that one where I believe they knew it was there, but that the seat was on fire, so they couldn't get to it. And then another one where the seats were starting to get involved, and so they ripped the seats out. And in the process of ripping the seats out, they go, "Oh, check it out! There's a fire extinguisher." Like they didn't know until they ripped the seats out. And we don't have any reports of it, but I've had other people tell me, "Oh yeah, I think there's one rolling around in the back of the in the bed." We've definitely had fires that originate in the bed. And so it's just, and obviously different models are built different ways, and it makes sense to put them in different places. But the whole point is, don't just see this and go, "Oh, let's just throw a fire extinguisher on there, check the box." Like, be intentional about where it's placed. And then the next level is practice pulling it from wherever it is, and briefing people, hey, if somebody comes to your unit to help with prescribed fire and they're a visitor from elsewhere and they're going to, jump on the UTV to do whatever it is they're going to do, part of your briefing should be, hey, this is where our fire extinguishers are. And this is how you deploy them. It just needs to be a regular part of that whole equipment, right? That fire extinguishers go with UTVs. So number one is go out there and make sure. I remember recently we were doing a presentation, and I asked people, how many in here are have UTVs? or are they're assigned to your units, or you're utilizing them or whatever. Because even if you don't own a UTV, a lot of times you'll show up to an incident nowadays, and the organization, the team, will have rented a fleet of them and check them out and stuff like that. But I was asking, okay, how many of you can guarantee that there's a fire extinguisher on every UTV and that all of those fire extinguishers work? Because that's the second part of your question, the serviceable piece. Is we've had instances where people like, okay, it's on fire. There's the fire extinguisher. Then they get the fire extinguisher and they go to use it, and nothing happens.
Yeah, the Angelina and Sabine National Forests prescribed fire, UTV fire from, I think, 2021. That was, they jumped out, grabbed the fire extinguisher, pointed it, tried to fire it off, and nothing happened. It just...
Yeah.
That would be so... I don't know if I've ever told you I had a vehicle catch on fire when I was driving it before.
Oh,
It was I was in high school. It was my 1970 Volkswagen Bug, and it caught on fire. And I just remember feeling like all of the blood left my legs, And when I read that in that RLS, it took me right back to watching my 1970 Volkswagen Bug go up in flames. Of course, I had no fire extinguisher, and everyone who drives an old Bug ought to have a fire extinguisher. But what a horrible feeling to have one there, but to have it not work as intended.
Yeah. And that phenomenon, what they discovered in that report and in subsequent ones, is that it's a pretty common thing for those fire extinguishers that are on vehicles, especially if they're on bumpy roads, to get what's known as packed. And that it...
I've also heard the term kind of caked. Like they
caked. Yeah. Caked. Where it just, all the powder settles or something like that. I don't know all the technical pieces of it, but basically it makes it inoperable. It doesn't work.
And when you think about where we're driving UTVs, it's just going to sit there and shake the material in there, cake it up, and it could very easily become inoperable just in regular use if you're not checking it often to make sure it's working.
Yeah, and so that's their recommendation is that you have a plan that makes sense for your level of use, and there's like a inspection that can be done, just by any of us, and then there's like a professional inspection that needs to be done on an annual basis with any fire extinguisher.
And if you look at that Angelina and Sabine RLS, they have some good lessons about doing those inspections, checking them out, and some links and things you can learn about how to do that, and making sure that's not happening to you.
Yeah, and so that's the just like anything, it's never simple, because we'd love this to be so simple that it was just like, you have a UTV, make sure it has a fire extinguisher, period.
End of story.
Yeah, that'd be sweet. But
if you have a 1970 Bug, make sure you have a fire extinguisher.
That's a good one. That's so funny, because I drove a 68
nice.
VW Bug in high school. Never caught on fire. All kinds of other things happened to it. And my wife also drove a 68 VW Beetle in high school.
We're of that generation.
Yeah, apparently. And the floor completely fell through, so she was looking down at the pavement going by.
Yes. I actually got a 73 Super Beetle afterward, and that happened to me. The floor part. Yeah. I'm a slow learner.
Yeah, that's so funny. But yeah, the lesson has a few layers to it, which again is great, and it makes sense. Like if your organization has UTVs, hey, pay attention and use this document to be able to kind of go down this checklist of things, because the bottom line is it is terrible to have your UTV be on fire. You know what I mean? And this next part of it is about some prevention things that we can do with inspections, because there is another commonality of how the UTVs catch on fire. There's as much diversity as you can imagine as well. They catch on fire in a whole bunch of different ways, but there is one way that really makes sense, and that's this debris, just grass and sticks and stuff like that getting caught up in a couple different places. One of them being, underneath. And this lesson we've pushed in a bunch of different venues. It was the first thing that came up when we first started seeing this thing. But basically, the driving over grass and trees and all of that stuff. Some of that stuff gets caught up in the undercarriage of the UTV, and then also in like wheel wells and up behind the bed and the cab. Any place that stuff can get accumulated, it accumulates. Some of it's just in the bed.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
One of the reports that is featured in the data points here, it talks about there was it looked like a hay bale. There was that much stuff wedged in there. And luckily they saw it before it caught on fire. They were doing some other kind of work on the UTV and just happened to find basically a bale of hay wedged under there. And I mean, it makes sense driving a lot of times through the black or, things like that. It's pretty easy. Or in areas where there might be embers or whatever. It's makes sense that you'd want to get that stuff cleaned out.
Yeah, they recognized it as soon as, I remember that they were like wiring something or doing some sort of maintenance.
I think they were adding like an auxiliary light or something like that.
Yeah, exactly. And then they pull that one piece off and they're just like, whoa, look at all that stuff. And they immediately saw the hazard that it presents, right? Being like, man, we're driving over fire. And then lo and behold, it has happened. That very thing that they were concerned about, which is great. Like, I love that kind of RLS because they said, hey, we see a potential thing. And they had a lesson before it even caught fire. They're saying, hey, so now our inspection
includes
includes looking in here and then and periodically like either pulling the skid plate or looking under that floorboard or whatever. Because that's the other kind of complicating issue here is even if you wash the UTV and you do a good inspection, where that stuff accumulates can sometimes be hidden to the point where if you're not real intentional about looking for it, it's easy to miss. And then the other thing that gets complicated with these things is transporting fuel, flammable liquids, basically, you know what I mean, which is a thing that we do.
Yeah.
There's a whole bunch of different things that intersect there that elevate the chances of UTVs. And so they go hand in hand, right? The inspections and then the awareness of that being a thing. Like, there's a description in one of these where they're just headed back to the briefing area and then they try to slow down, but the brakes don't work. And they're just like, well, that's weird. And they try the brakes again, still don't work. And they look down and the floorboard's on fire, and I don't know that, knowing that that's a possibility is going to change that. But having done some drills certainly would help. You would know, okay, I know that the fire extinguisher is on wherever it is on your UTV, whether it's in the bed or on the roll cage or in between the seats or whatever makes sense for your model, and it's just like when we started really pushing doing medical drills and back when the medical incident report had 9 lines and stuff like that, we were saying, hey, practice on this stuff. And people did. They started really doing it. And now we see in reports all the time, our medical training really paid off because when we had to use it, everybody knew their role and everybody, you know what I mean? It was like we saw a real change in the way that our ground forces were reacting because we had been pushing that train, drill on medical stuff that didn't used to get that much emphasis. And it'd be the same thing with this, like knowing that UTVs catch on fire, let's do some practice around it so that we get better at putting them out and also better at preventing them.
We're always going to be better at something we've practiced, right?
Yeah, exactly. And have a bit of a process to it and have the right equipment. It's just like like it's so funny to look back, right? At we were talking about the soft stretcher, and that there's this thing that's purpose built, and it used to be that we really pushed like, oh, you should practice building a backcountry litter, out of space blankets and shirts and whatever piece of trees and stuff. And that's a great skill, and we should still have the ability to do that. I mean, I know our creativity with fiber tape is legendary, right? But then it's also to look back now over time and be like, yeah, but there's this purpose built
Yeah, pretty small, pretty lightweight, easy to pack. Yeah.
And it's ready right now. As soon as you pull it out of your pack, there's no building it. And I think this is one of those instances where it's just like, yeah, man, let's make sure that the right equipment, the fire extinguisher, is there, and let's do some training around it, and then let's also adapt our inspections to include some of the lessons that we've gotten specific to our environment, our use. Our being wildland fire folks.
Yeah. I think, one other thing that it's not in every one of these reports or anything, but it's in a couple of them that I think is worth mentioning is just the idea of maintenance on the machine itself. There were a couple instances where the fuel seemed to be dropping pretty fast, or there was a check engine light on or whatever. And it's so hard if we're out being totally operational with these pieces of equipment, and then you try and find a decent place to park. But it seems like the machine itself can get overlooked in terms of having a good maintenance plan if it's kind of a community machine. It's not like in the back of someone's truck all the time. I think that's kind of a thing too. I mean, when you think of the prevention side, not just the, reaction side, I suppose.
Yeah, and we've all faced that, right? As we're gonna lock up the chainsaws because somebody, takes them out and doesn't clean them. So now there's gonna be a checkout system. You know what I mean? It's like anytime there's communal equipment, you're gonna deal with this.
Exactly.
And UTVs being relatively, we're still learning about some of this stuff. And, is it a vehicle? Because some of our vehicle maintenance stuff is taken care of by maybe fleet. Whereas, do you know what I mean? Like this, we're just trying to figure some of this stuff out. And, but there's some things that locally that you can intentionally include. Like if your inspection doesn't say specifically to look at welds, that's a good thing to look at, because a couple of these had weak points with welds. That's not something I would intentionally look at, you know what I mean? But then as soon as somebody points it out, you're like, oh yeah, that makes sense. That's kind of has the potential to be a weak point.
Yeah.
And in certain cases, like exhaust, if that weld breaks, then you've got plastic and heat right next to each other.
Yeah. And potentially drip fuel and
exactly.
Yeah.
That if you're hauling Jerry's around, and of course they're going to tip over and they're going to leak through the bed, and you know what I mean, all of that kind of stuff, because we have it with regular pickups and stuff like that as well.
Yeah.
That's a great point. Just a maintenance plan in general. Mm-hmm. And one of them, that fuel line one, I think it ended up actually being there was a recall related to it.
Mm-hmm. I think so.
And so certain programs are really good about tracking that stuff and knowing that stuff, and other programs are like, drive it like you stole it. And that's the nature of it. So I would try to use your sphere of influence to be one of the programs that's kind of dialed.
Yeah. Yeah, the one incident that is highlighted here where 4 UTVs burned up, that would be huge impact to a program.
Yeah, absolutely. And sometimes it is a circumstance where parking someplace, with the fuel, you know what I mean? Sometimes it's just a bad kind of thing. I remember we had one where they were doing some interior ignition or something like that, and they just they couldn't get the UTV going fast enough, and they had to bail, and then the UTV burned up as part of the main fire. You know what I mean? I don't think we included it in this data set because it's not like the UTV itself burned up. It's just it happened to be in the path of a fire, and that's true of any completely separate. And I don't even know if it's a good idea to even cross those streams here, but UTVs also allow us to get into places. And then when we're doing ignition with them, potentially putting ourselves in a tough spot, you know what I mean? Which requires the UTV operating to get out of. And if the UTV stops working, or it gets stuck, or the fire moves faster than you can, then you're talking about an entrapment, which is, a whole separate thing, but it's related to UTVs.
Yeah, I would really encourage folks. I mean, if all you do is read the data points here and get the lesson and put that lesson into action, equip all UTVs with an accessible and serviceable fire extinguisher, that's great. But I would encourage people to click through and check out these reports that are featured here, because there are some really good lessons, and I just appreciate all the folks that were involved sharing them to make other people aware of what it was that they had to deal with. I think there's also some good lessons. One of these is a prescribed fire that was a couple thousand acres, 3,000 acres, something like that, and they have some really good lessons on dealing with the incident within an incident of a UTV fire while you have like 2,000 or 3,000 acres on fire. How do you, it's just like any other incident within an incident, but it's good to see how people deal with that. What do they do? Who's going to take care of the UTV situation? And are we going to keep, doing ignitions? And are we going to hold what we've got? What does that look like? And so I think there's some really great lessons in these reports for people to check out. Absolutely.
And I think this is a tool that also allows for some delegation or some leadership. Say you are an FMO or a station manager, or what I mean, something like that, and you have somebody that is in charge of all the UTVs, or you think, oh, maybe it would be good to have somebody, or there's this one person that's really interested in that. You know what I mean? You can give them this, and like you're saying, hey, you know what? Why don't you go to the Lessons Learned Center website and kind of just look around at UTV related things, and you tell us what lessons we need to bring to our program. And maybe that either there's an existing other duties as assigned, like UTV program manager or something like that, or it pops up like maybe we should have somebody periodically kind of figure out what the latest UTV related lessons are and bring them to our program. I could see that being really, like a good leadership move.
Yeah, it's using the tools that are available.
Yeah, for sure. And there's some folks out there that are eager and skilled and able to do all that stuff, and that come back with a great suggestion that's going to improve your program's efficiency and safety. Like that's
that's the point. Yeah.
Yeah. I think there's a lot of opportunity here.
Well, I appreciate the work that you always do to pull in the good analysis, and I appreciate everyone who has shared lessons on these UTV fires, and hopefully we'll get some traction on this and people can implement these lessons. Go check their fire extinguishers, know where they are, make sure they're serviceable and accessible, and maybe we'll see fewer of these.
Absolutely. And share your stories, share your lessons. A lot of these were rapid lesson sharing instances where somebody had something going on and they shared their story, and it really makes a difference, especially when we can round them up collectively like this and put some data back out there.
Yeah. Remember, one of the key things we ask people when we ask them to develop good lessons is, what would you share with others who may find themselves in a similar situation? And I think, all of these are really well done, lots of good lessons, and yeah, check it out.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thanks to Travis for the conversation. I hope this episode motivates you to check your UTVs to make sure there is an accessible and serviceable fire extinguisher on board. It's easy to overlook, but pretty critical to have when you need one. Talk to you next time. Thank you for listening to the Wildfire Lessons podcast. Be sure to subscribe, share, give us a review. Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Wildfire Lessons. Music provided by second-generation smoke jumper Steve Baker, who always likes to keep one foot in the black. Thanks, Steve. Remember, we honor through learning.